Well, are we all ready? Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed like my pet, ready to see the show? The longest journey by air from Manitoulin begins with a short flight from Sudbury in a Dash 8. Here we see Pastor Paul about to embark during a damp day in October 2014. It's up and away from Sudbury Airport. In an hour, it's down again at Pearson Airport in Toronto. A little time to check with the computer, and it's time to settle down in a Boeing 777 for the flight across the ocean to Frankfurt, Germany. At Frankfurt, we see a giant double-deck Airbus that carries hundreds of people sitting on the tarmac. We flew on Egypt Air from Frankfurt to Cairo, and before the tour began in earnest, we went for a van ride to see Joseph's Lake, south of Cairo. Our Christian guide, Noah, watches our security man take a picture of Roger and Kathy close to the lake. Many smaller streets in Cairo are lined with markets and vendors. The Egyptian in this photo illustrates the modest attire many men wear, and the two cows remind one of the lean kine in Pharaoh's dream. Our driver lost his way a few times and had to ask this angler for directions. He was fishing in a canal from the Nile River. The river provides water for the green crops of Egypt. The country would otherwise be a desert. These little jeepneys are popular taxis for the less affluent folks. The little three-wheel gas-powered vehicles are regularly seen on even four-lane roads, going along at about 40 kilometers an hour while carrying several passengers. About 30 kilometers south of Cairo, our little party of 4 or 5 visited some very ancient pyramids at Saqqara. This Egyptian illustrates the construction material used to build some of these pyramids. These three amigos, the best one is in the middle, stand in front of the famous stepped pyramid of Djoser, built of stone in 2630 BC. As you see, the pyramid is undergoing maintenance. The steps consist of one mastaba, or tomb, being laid over an earlier one, a style later to be formalized in the Sumerian ziggurat. This funerary structure is near a stepped pyramid. From left to right, Kathy, Noah, Paul, and Roger examined the interior of the building. Instead of a courtyard, there are 2 rows of 20 stone columns over 6 meters high, each fluted to resemble wood. This figure is in a mural at Saqqara. It shows the clothing of ancient Egypt. Many slaves and other workers wore little or nothing. On the way back to Cairo, we visited an historical park featuring this Sphinx of Memphis dating back to the 19th dynasty from 1341 to 1200 BC. On the same grounds, there are statues of Ramses II. The guide explained that a pharaoh who was alive at the time of the sculpture was shown with one knee bent as if walking. Dead pharaohs' legs were in a standing position. This statue of Ramses, one of the most noteworthy of the pharaohs, had fallen and has been transferred to inside a specially built structure. The statue of Ramses II in limestone during the New Kingdom. As you see, donkeys are still used for transportation. The oldest and largest of the big three pyramids at Giza, close to Cairo, was erected between 2560 and 2540 BC for Khufu, or as he is known in Greek, Cheops. It is the oldest of the seven wonders of the ancient world. The second great Giza pyramid was built for Khufu's son Khafre, 2558 to 2532 BC. The latter's son Menkaure, 2532 to 2503 BC, had the third large pyramid constructed. Some smaller pyramids were built for the spouses of the pharaohs. One of the big three still has the stone cladding near its top. The other pyramids, and the lower part of this one, have had the smooth surface rocks pillaged for other uses. This photo illustrates how the ravages of time have eroded away at the ancient structures. It is possible to climb the outside of the pyramid and go inside to visit the tomb. The passageways are quite confining, and at places very steep. The Great Sphinx was built in Khafre's time. It was the largest statue of the ancient world, measuring 240 feet long and 66 feet tall. It looks almost as big as the large pyramid from some angles. In reality, it is much smaller, as seen in the middle left of this picture. How many times have you seen pictures of the Great Sphinx's rump? There are lots of Egyptian tourist operators offering rides to visitors. In this photo, Paul is trying out his camel riding skills. These two 11-year-olds stayed with Paul and Dave Jack for almost 1/2 hour, but could not persuade either to part with any money. Note the headgear of even young Muslim girls. Back in Cairo, you see a strange variety of vehicles. short cruise on the Nile in one of the Egyptian sailboats was a time of quietness and relaxation, while right in the heart of Cairo. The Great River. A luxury residence on the riverbank. A high-rise condominium on the opposite bank. These fishermen are casting out their net in a style that must go back to Bible times. Our hotels on the trip were first-rate. A bonus with our stay at the Cairo Hotel was the performance of several weddings. The bands at the weddings consisted of men dressed in white, singing and playing percussion instruments with one very loud horn with a very distinctive sound. This pair of musicians performed in another part of the hotel. When leaving Cairo, we ran into the usual traffic jams on the way to the airport. Traffic seems chaotic, with a constant din of car horns. The laws appear very lax, to say the least. Take particular note of the minivan with 4 or 5 passengers riding on the roof. Although we were slated to go to Sharm el-Sheikh by land, arrangements were suddenly changed and we went in a jet airplane. The airport is shared by civilian and military aircraft. We flew along the west coast of the Sinai Peninsula over land that the Hebrew children may have traveled after leaving Egypt. It can be a most hostile and forbidding land. Sharm el-Sheikh is a very westernized small city geared to the tourist industry. It is very, very different from Cairo. From Sharm el-Sheikh, we went by van to our Mount Sinai motel. This is the road to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is also known as Mount Horeb or Mount Moses. Paul climbed to the top of the mountain, leaving at 1 a.m. in order to see sunrise from the summit. Roger and Kathy took a camel. Dave, Jack, and I, we preferred to sleep. Close to Mount Sinai, one finds the famous St. Catherine's Monastery, built between 548 and 565 A.D., and it is named for one of the early Christian martyrs. This is the mountain behind the monastery. Quite possibly it's Mount Sinai. This scene is inside the monastery's walls. Besides a library containing some of the most ancient Christian manuscripts, the monastery contains samples of early Christian art. These two bushes are reputed to be the burning bush seen by Moses. On the roads we traveled, there are frequent checkpoints, like the one in the picture. Notice a machine gun hanging at the side of one of the officials. Here we see an attractive Muslim mosque and minaret on the shore of the Red Sea. On the shore of the Gulf of Aqaba, there are several tourist resorts patronized largely by Eastern Europeans. This is the dining room of one of the resorts. I am pointing to a fig palm on the resort property. The resorts are like oases in the barren desert. See here an Israeli patrol boat near the Israeli town of Eilat on the Gulf of Aqaba. It is a major port for Israel. After a night at this Jordanian hotel, it's on to the historic Petra. One enters the site through an immense crack in the red sandstone. The structures in Petra were carved out of the red rock. The city was established as early as 312 BC and is a World Heritage Site. It is usually identified as Selah in the Old Testament. It is also referred to as, quote, the cleft in the rock. The site has been featured in such films as Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. From Petra, we went up to see Mount Nebo. This is the traditional place where Moses looked upon the promised land, but was not allowed to enter. Then Moses climbed from the plains of Moab to Pisgah Peak in Mount Nebo, across from Jericho, and the Lord pointed out to him the promised land as they gazed out across Gilead as far as Dan. There is Naphtali, and there is Ephraim and Manasseh, and across there Judah, extending to the Mediterranean Sea. There is the Negeb, and the Jordan Valley, and Jericho, the city of palm trees, and Zoar, the Lord told him. It is the promised land, the Lord told Moses. I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that I would give it to their descendants. Now you have seen it, but you will not enter it." So Moses, the disciple of the Lord, died in the land of Moab, as the Lord had said. The Lord buried him in a valley near Beth Peor in Moab, but no one knows the exact place. Going into Israel, we see more agriculture, crops, and vineyards. We arrived at Caesarea, the place where the gospel was first preached to Gentiles. It was cooler there than in Jordan and Egypt. Our guide showed us the ruins of the harbor at Caesarea. It was built in the 1st century by Herod the Great. Caesarea has many reminders of Roman times, including this amphitheater and aqueduct. We rode on to Mount Carmel, where Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal. The statue of Elijah is of recent vintage. The ancient Israelites prohibited graven images. This photo shows the view of the lush valley below Mount Carmel. These caves along the roadside are reminiscent of the kind of tombs of Jesus' time. We stopped to examine the ruins at Megiddo. The problem of supplying water to large cities, a serious issue even in times of peace, could become acute in times of siege. Megiddo's main water source was located at the foot of the mound, beyond the city's fortifications. In order to ensure access to the spring from within the city, a hidden gallery was built on the slope of the mound in the 10th or 9th century BC. This gallery was later blocked and replaced by an elaborate water system, which remained in use in the Assyrian city of the 7th century BC. To the right, a square shaft dug through to the bedrock and ending in an 80-meter-long tunnel reaches the spring about 35 meters below the surface of the mound. Outside access to the spring was concealed to prevent enemies from discovering the existence of the water system. It's on to Nazareth, Jesus' hometown, and we see an historic way to grind olives into olive oil. People in costume reenacted activities of Christ's time: a carpenter and a spinner. Nazareth as it looks today. It's on to visit an old synagogue built in the 3rd or 4th centuries A.D. at Capernaum. Jesus visited an earlier synagogue at the site, and part of it may have been built by the centurion mentioned in Luke 7, verse 5. We climbed another large hill, the Mount of the Beatitudes.
Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
North of the Sea of Galilee, we saw the Jordan River near its source. While in northern Israel, we visited Caesarea Philippi. It was here that Peter made the proclamation that Jesus was the Christ, after being asked who they thought he was. This hill with the cave was a center for the worship of Pan, with its debauchery. The entrance to the cave was considered the gates of hell, which Jesus alludes to. At the northeastern border of Israel, we took in the view from the Golan Heights, which Israel conquered from Syria at the end of the 6 Days' War in 1967. Some of the buildings in the valley are UN property. The United Nations has an observer force there since the armistice between Israel and Syria in 1974. Syria lies just over the hills. We had the privilege of taking a brief cruise on the Sea of Galilee, a sea so often mentioned in the Gospels. We embarked on one of these boats. Hello there. Our guide explained that the remains of an approximately 2,000-year-old fishing boat was discovered in the mud along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. This reconstruction is an exact copy, since the original is kept in a temperature and humidity-controlled chamber. Among the questions asked were, did Jesus or his disciples own or operate this vessel? From the measurements of the remains, artisans have reproduced a model of what the original vessel looked like. Just imagine Jesus, Joseph, John, Peter, and the rest traveling in such a craft. Our journey took us to a special baptismal place on the Jordan River, where several on the tour were rebaptized or baptized for the first time. Each made a profession of faith before being immersed. Our chaplain for the tour, Pastor Paul Van Kesteren, helped by lay minister Dave Jack, baptized 21 individuals that day. In this photo, Paul and Dave are about to baptize Sean McKinnon from New Jersey. Here we see Edna, originally from the Philippines, getting ready to be baptized in the Jordan River. Sean and Edna were very vocal in affirming their faith in Christ. Our dear friends Roger and Kathy, after being baptized. After the baptismal service, the tour visited Beth Shean, described as the most magnificent archaeological site in Israel, located at the juncture of the Jezreel and Jordan valleys. It has been inhabited from time immemorial. Edna, one of our party, tests the acoustics of this amphitheater. Other views of the ancient site. Like other Roman settlements, the city was equipped with bathhouses and toilets for the convenience of the public.
The bathhouse toilets. For the convenience of its visitors, the bathhouse provided public toilets. Remains of the seats are visible here. Toilet tissue was a soft leaf attached to a twig. A channel of running water under the seats afforded drainage. Like other Roman Byzantine cities, Beth Shean had numerous bathhouses, of which this example at 8,500 square meters is the smaller of two discovered in the town center. Built in the 4th century A.D., this bathhouse was in use for 200 years, undergoing periodic renovations and alterations.
It should be remembered that the Holy Land was a Roman province from before the time of Christ to several centuries after the crucifixion. Therefore, all the Roman ruins. It's on to the Dead Sea, where we observe sunrise over the water from our hotel balcony. The sea is supplied by the Jordan, and since so many use the latter for a supply of water, there's little or nothing to empty into the Dead Sea. The result is that the level of the sea is constantly falling. It sure is salty, and one floats on it like a cork. It is the lowest place on earth. A view of the sea from our hotel balcony. Going north along the west shore of the Dead Sea, we visit the Masada National Park. The park contains the mountain fortress built as a redoubt by Herod the Great. After the fall of Jerusalem to the Romans in 70 A.D., a few hundred zealots retreated to the fortress. The Romans built ramparts up the sides, determined that none of the subject peoples get the idea that they could defy Rome. As their doom became inevitable, the Jews there felt that death was better than enslavement.
The breaching point. Here the siege of Masada ended. The ramp that the Romans had built up to the summit of the mountain reached to below this point. At the top of the ramp rose the siege tower, and in it was the battering ram with which the Romans assaulted the casement wall. However, the rebels had built a wall of earth and wood, against which the battering ram was ineffective. Observing this, Silva, thinking it easier to destroy this wall by fire, ordered his soldiers to hurl at it showers of burning torches. At the first outbreak of the fire, a north wind, which blew in the face of the Romans, caused them alarm, for diverting the flame from above, it drove it against them. Then suddenly the wind veering, as if by divine providence, to the south, and blowing with full force in the opposite direction, wafted and flung the flames against the wall, which now through and through was all ablaze. Quote from Joseph Flavius. When night fell, and it was clear that the situation was hopeless, and that the Romans would break in at dawn, Eleazar ben Yair assembled his followers and called for mass suicide. The Romans, expecting further opposition, were at a loss to conjecture what had happened. Here, encountering the mass of the slain, instead of exulting as over enemies, they admired the nobility of their resolve and the contempt of death displayed by so many in carrying it unwaveringly into execution. Quote from Joseph Flavius. The excavations here uncovered ballista balls and arrowheads, numerous slingshots, and signs of burning, evidence of the battle that had raged at this spot.
We went on a cable car to reach the top of the mountain. The following photos show the remains of the fortress.
A cistern at Masada.
The view from the top looking east to the Dead Sea. The area west of the Dead Sea is very dry and inhospitable, but there is a stream of water at En-Gedi. It was here that David found refuge in his efforts to elude Saul. One of our party couldn't resist wading in the pool. It was in caves in the dry mountains that David hid from Saul. We read in 1 Samuel 24, verses 2 to 4, that it was in one of the caves that Saul inadvertently exposed himself to David's wrath if the latter had chosen to retaliate. In one of these dry caves, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1952. The city of Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. These slides show a panorama of Jerusalem, a city that caused Jesus to say, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones all those God sends to her. How often I have wanted to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks, beneath her wings, but you wouldn't let me." The Garden of Gethsemane. This is the location where Jesus went to pray with his disciples the night before the crucifixion. It was here that Jesus prayed 3 times while his closest followers went to sleep, despite his request that they watch with him.
My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Matthew 26:39. O Jesus, in deepest night and agony, you spoke these words of trust and surrender to God the Father in Gethsemane. In love and gratitude, I want to say in times of fear and distress, my Father, I do not understand you, but I trust you.
The next two pictures show part of the old walled city of Jerusalem. One of the gates of the old walled city, the Dung Gate. I guess we know what it was used for. This one shows an intersection in the modern city. In this ancient church in Jerusalem, our group went in and sang. It was in the small medicinal pool at the Bethesda complex that Jesus healed the paralytic.
And Jesus said to the man who had been ill for 38 years, Rise, take up your pallet, and walk. From John 5. Jesus is all-powerful, omnipotent. He always has ways and means to help you.
The miracle is recorded in John's Gospel, chapter 5, verses 2 through 15. This photo illustrates the size and traffic on the narrow streets of the old city, where motor vehicles and pedestrians compete for space. This shows the dungeon where Jesus was kept before the crucifixion.
Underground caves, prison. When these underground caves were rediscovered in 1889, their physical characteristics, their proximity to Caiaphas's palace, and their contiguity with the sacred pit, dungeon, all suggested the public jail where, according to a 4th century Jerusalem tradition, not recorded in the Gospels, Jesus would have been scourged, not only by Pilate, but also by Caiaphas, and where the apostles Peter and John would have been held and scourged for preaching the name of Jesus in the temple area after the resurrection. Acts 5, verses 19 to 42. Aided by the context, Christians traditionally recall here some of the painful sufferings endured by Jesus during his passion, regardless of where they took place, as well as by the apostles, the first believers in his name. Games incised into the pavement remind us of Christ's suffering at the hands of the soldiers, from Mark 15, 16 to 20.
On the Via della Rosa, where Jesus walked to Calvary, there are memorials of the Stations of the Cross. The first picture shows the 4th station. Station number 5 is where Simon of Cyrene was conscripted to carry Christ's cross because Jesus was too weak to do so himself. This is one of the alley bazaars in the old city.
Although it doesn't have the grandeur of medieval cathedrals, this structure is quite possibly the most famous church in Christendom. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, on the site where the crucifixion and resurrection are thought to have taken place. Inside the church, worshippers venerate Christian relics. The interior is fairly stark. Because the church is under the care of several very ancient churches, including the Roman Catholics, little is done to improve it because of the difficulty in reaching a consensus on issues. Hardly an example of Christian love and harmony. Hey, is that Pastor Paul in a first century marketplace? This golden menorah was recreated for the first time since the destruction of the Second Temple, according to research by the Temple Institute. The description on the base records that it is overlaid with pure gold. The description goes on to say it is fit to be kindled in the holy temple. At the time it is brought to its proper place within the sanctuary, it shall be sanctified for divine service of the holy temple. May it be rebuilt speedily and in our days. The location of the early temples is now occupied by the Islamic Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is considered a holy place in the Islamic faith. Rubble from the destruction done to Jerusalem by conquerors of centuries, if not millennia, gone by. The wall in the back of this photo is the famous Wailing Wall. Devout Jews come to pray at its base. Individuals are allowed to write prayers on paper, roll them up, and place them in cracks in the wall. Paul is doing just that to a prayer I wrote. We were informed that from time to time the prayers are burned and the smoke ascends to heaven. Reminders of danger are present even at the West Wall Plaza. This device is obviously designed to contain the blast of an explosive. On our way to Tel Aviv Airport, we passed by the substantial wall the Israelis recently built to prevent incursions by Palestinians from the West Bank. At Tel Aviv Airport, we boarded an Air Canada 787, similar to the one in the picture. We settled in for a 12 or 13-hour direct flight to Toronto. After a short flight from Toronto, we were met by Ryan Charlton, who drove us by car to Little Current. It was a most delightful and enlightening but very tiring trip. We were home and glad to be there. Uh-oh, I guess we ran too long. One of our audience has fallen asleep.